Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we are going to learn 15 most popular Azure cloud services, and I will explain each one with the real-time example so that if you are complete beginner, you will understand each services and how to use that. Okay, and this video is going to be very helpful if you are preparing for the AG 900 certification also. Okay, so let's get started. So what we are going to cover today, here we will see the 15 services, but do not worry, I'm not going to bore you with the documentation part. I will explain each one like I'm explaining to my friend. Okay, so if you'll see here, we have the different service in Azure. Okay, so some services we use for the compute purposes, some services we use for the storage purposes, some use services we use for the database purposes. So we have so many services, right? And what all services we are used for the compute services, compute purpose. So compute means if you're running your application, right? So for that purpose, we are using the virtual machine, app services, functions, Kubernetes. Okay. Similarly, for the storage, we are using the, suppose if you want to store your files, for that we are using the blob storage. Similarly, for the database purposes, we are using the SQL or Cosmos DB. Again, for the security related stuff, we are using the Microsoft Entra ID as well as Key Vault. Okay. For DevOps related things, we are using the DevOps and Monitor. For networking related stuff to deliver our content fast, we are using the CDN. Okay. For the automation related stuff, we are using the Logic Apps. Okay, for AI related things, right? If you want to add intelligence in your application. So for that, we are using the AI services, and for the messaging purpose, right? When application are talking to each other, at that time we are using the service bus. So let's go one by one and understand that. So what is the Azure virtual machine? So in simple word, if you see that, it is like, renting a computer from the Microsoft. Okay, and you do not need to buy any physical server. You go to the Azure, select how much RAM you want, how many CPU you want, which operating system you want, whether it's Windows or Linux. Okay, and within 2 minutes, your virtual computer will be ready, right? So for example, suppose if you are working in any startup, or maybe you are starting a new startup, right? So you do not need, and you need, right? Suppose if you need a powerful server to run your application, but you cannot afford, like, 2 lakhs of server, right? So what you will do? So in that scenario, you will rent a virtual machine on Azure that will cost around, like, 5 rupees or 10 rupees per hours. What you will do? You will use during the day and you will shut it down at night. Okay, and you have to pay for the hours you have used that. Okay, and how you are going to connect that? So you will connect that system using the remote desktop if you are working in the Windows, or SSH if you are working in the Linux. Okay, just like, sitting in your computer. Okay, and when to use that? So when you need a full control over the operating system, right? Suppose if you want to install the custom softwares, or you need to run the legacy application, at that time you can use the virtual machine. Okay, now we will understand what is the Azure App Services. Okay, so this is for the people who say, I don't want to manage the server. Okay, if you don't want to manage the server, but you want to host your website, at that time you will use the Azure App Services. Okay, so what you have to do, you have to write your code in any language, whether it's Python, .NET, Java, Node.js, and then you upload that to the Azure. Okay, that's it. Your website will be live on the internet. Okay, and the good part is, like, you do not need to worry about the Linux update, uh, like Nginx configuration, SSL certification. Azure will handle everything. Okay, so suppose for example, you built a portfolio. Okay, suppose, like, if you are working on the any REST API, so instead of buying a server, what you will do, you will just push your code to the Azure services. Okay, within 2 minutes your site will be available. Okay, and when to use that? Suppose if you're working on the any web application, REST API, backend, and you do not need any server headache during that time, you can use the Azure App Services. Okay, I have given all the example here. Here is the workflow how you can use that. Okay, now we will understand what is the Azure Blob Storage. So Blob stands for binary large object. Okay, so in simple word, it is a place to store the files, any files related to, like, whether it's image or videos, backup, logs, everything, anything you can place there. So think like it is a Google Drive, but for your application. Okay, and your application can upload and download file from the blob storage using a simple URL. So for each file, it will provide the URL that you can use that to use further. Okay, and this is very cheap. I would say that it's like, it is charging 1.5 rupees per GB, okay, in a month, and it is extremely fast also. So you got it right. So when you have to store the image, videos, document, static website files, log files, at that time you can use the Azure Blob Storage. Okay, now we will understand what is the SQL database. So you know the SQL, right? We are writing for the select, insert, update, right? The same thing. So same thing, but it will run on the cloud. Okay, and it is the fully managed database. Fully managed means Microsoft will be handle all the backups, all the updates, security patches, scaling. So you need to write the query. No DBA is required at that time, right? So suppose if you are working in any e-commerce website, right? And that has multiple tables like products, users, order. So you create a Azure SQL database, connect with your application, and start querying. Okay, Azure will, and the good part, like, Azure will take the backup in every 5 minutes automatically. So if something is break, you can restore to any point in the last 35 days. Okay, and also it gives you the 99.9% uptime. That means, like, only 4 minutes of the downtime in the entire year. Okay, so when to use this Azure SQL database? You can use for the any structure relationship data, right? Like for e-commerce, banking, CRM, inventory system, you can use the Azure SQL database. Now, what is the Azure Cosmos DB? So this is a NoSQL database. Okay, so you can store the JSON document, not only the just row and columns, but here what is the what makes it special? So it is globally distributed and within 10 millisecond response time. Okay, so suppose if you're working in a gaming app, okay, so you have the players in India, US, Europe, and all are playing together. So with normal database, suppose if it exists in the US, and Indian players, like, they will face some kind of the latency, like, 200 millisecond delay, right? But with the Cosmos DB, you replicate data to the all region. So Indian player can read from the India server, and that response will be within, like, some 1 2 3 millisecond. Okay, so it's very, you can say that's a zero lag timing. So when to use that? So suppose if you are working in the any global application, gaming application, or maybe IoT, some real-time application where speed and global access matters, at that time you can use the Azure Cosmos DB. Okay, now we will understand what is the Azure function. So this is the serverless computing. So what does serverless means, right? It means, like, there is a server, but you do not manage it. You just write a small piece of code, tell Azure that run this when X happen, okay, and forget about that. So, and the good part is, like, pay only when your code actually runs. So suppose if your code is running for zero point 0.3 second, right? So you will pay only for zero point 0.3 seconds, not 24 into 7. Okay. So for example, suppose if user is uploading a photo, okay, and you want to automatically create, like, three sizes. Suppose, like, a thumbnail, medium, and large. So what you will do? You will write a function. So suppose if any new file appears in the uh, blob storage, it will resize and save in the 3 version. Okay, and that's it, right? You do not manage any server. This function sleeps until someone uploaded, does the job for 1 second, and go back to sleep. Okay, and you have to pay only for the time you are using that. Okay, so when we have to use this, when you have any background task, file processing, schedule job, webhooks, event driven code, during that time you can use the Azure function. Now we will understand what is the Microsoft Intra ID. So you might have heard, like, Azure Active Directory, right? Or Azure AD. So Microsoft renamed to the Intra ID in 2023, but it does the same thing. So this is how, like, company manages work all the access, right? Like, what, who can access what, or who can access when, right? So think it is like, security guard of your organization. So for the example, you can see that, suppose if you a company has, like, 5,000 employees. So when a new employee joins, uh, what it will happen, like, they will create an account in the Entra ID. They get access to the email, Teams, SharePoint, and your custom application, all with one login, right? And when they leave the company, disable their account. So instantly it will, he or she will not access anything, whether it's email, file, all gone in one click, right? So this is called single sign-on also. So login once, access everything, no need to remember, like, 20 different passwords. Okay. And also you can sign in with Microsoft button on website also. That's the Intra ID behind the scene. Okay. So when to use that? Suppose if you have the employee login management, SSO, multi-factor authentication, app access control, during that time you can use the Microsoft Intra ID. Okay. Now we will understand what is the Azure DevOps. So this is complete toolkit for building and delivering the softwares. Okay, and it has everything. So it has repo, like, Git. It has the pipeline, CI/CD. It has the boards for project tracking. It has the test plan. It has the artifacts. Okay, but the, like, you can see the star feature is the pipeline, that means CI/CD. So suppose if you are working in a team where you have, like, 5 developers and they are building an application. So without DevOps, what will happen? Developer will finish the code, manually copies to the servers, right? And suppose, like, he is hoping that nothing will be break. Okay, but with the help of Azure DevOps, you can automate the process. So developer will push the code to the Git pipeline, auto run the test, all test pass. It will auto deploy to the production within 5 minutes. So no human involved. Okay, and if test fails, like, if it will deploy, if it will deployment will be stopped, and developers will get notified. So no broken code reached to the users. So when to use this? So any team building the software, automation testing, building and deployment, during that time you can use the Azure DevOps. Okay. Now we will understand what is the Azure Kubernetes services. So AKS means Azure Kubernetes service. Okay. So firstly, we will understand what is the Kubernetes, right? So it is a system to manage Docker container at scale. Okay. And AK is the managed Azure version. Okay. So they handle the complex part. So for example, suppose if your food delivery app is in Docker image, suppose, like, it is in the Docker container. On the normal days, 3 container handle all the traffic. Okay, but during IPL cricket match, order goes to, like, 10x, right? So what it does, the AK detects the load. It will automatically detects the load. Automatically it will create the 30 containers, and it will handle all the order smoothly. And after the matches, when the traffic drops, AK will remove the extra containers, so you stop paying for them. Okay, so it is like, auto hiring the temporary worker during the busy times and letting them go when it is, like, quiet. Okay, so when to use that? So suppose if you have the microservices architecture, app that need auto scaling, running container in production, during that time you can use the Azure Kubernetes services. Okay, now we will understand what is the Azure Key Vault. So every app has the secret, right? Like, suppose the database password, API keys, certification. So where do you keep them? Okay, you cannot write in the code or you cannot push to the GitHub, right? The whole world can see in your password. So what is the right answer for that? So right answer for that is Azure Key Vault. So it is a secure vault. So your app asks Key Vault at the runtime and get the secret, use it, it will never store in your code. Okay, so for example, if your app connects to the payment gateway, right, the API key is the super sensitive, so store it in the key vault. Your app says, hey key vault, give me the payment key, and it will get it. Okay, after that it will make the payment, and it key was like never in any file. Okay, so even your own developers cannot see the crucial password if you set up in that way. Okay, so when to use the Azure Key Vault? So any application that has the password, API keys, connection string, SSL certificate, right? So during that time, you can use the Azure Key Vault. Now we will understand what is the Azure Monitor and App Insight. Okay, so this is your app health dashboard. I would say that, like the fitness tracker, but for your application. Okay, so it will tell like how fast your application is responding, are there any error, which page are slow, how many users are active right now, everything you can see here. So for example, suppose if you have the e-commerce site and it's 2 a.m., right? So suddenly like checkout page start failing. So what Azure Monitor will do, it will detect the error, it will send the SMS, like if you have the email alert and SMS alert, it will send you the email as well as SMS and show the exact line of the code where it has crashed. Okay, so and it will show like when it has started. Suppose if it started like 10 minutes ago, it will show that. So the good part, like you can fix it very immediate, right? So customer will be never knew this problem has happened. Okay, so when to use that? Every production application, I would so say that. So during that time, you can use the Azure Monitor and App Insight. Now we will understand what is the Azure CDN. Okay, so Azure CDN means like content delivery network. Okay, so suppose if your server is in one location, but your users are everywhere, right? So this is like further the further a user is from your server, the slower your website loads. Okay, so the problem like so what is the solution for that? So CDN will solve this by making the copies of your static content like image, CSS, JavaScript, videos, and placing them on the server all around the world. Okay, so suppose if your website server is in US, so what US user will be load from the US server and India users will be load from the India server. Okay, so when to use that? So any website that with image, videos or static files, especially if you have the global user, then you can use the Azure CDN. Now we will understand what is the Azure Logic Apps. So this is the automation without the code. Okay, so you create the workflows using drag and drop. So and do that like when this happened, do that. When this happened, do that. Okay, so this kind of thing you can do from the Azure Logic Apps. So suppose if you have the HR team and he received the like HR team received the resume via email, right? So they can create a logic app workflow. Like if new emails are arrived with the attachment, then save the document in the blob. After that, they can see in the notify on the Teams and log to the Excel. So such kind of like features they can create from the Azure Logic apps. Okay, so when to use this? So when you have the automatic repeating task, connecting different application, approval workflows, notification, you can use the Azure Logic apps. Okay, and the good part is like you can connect with the 400 services. So it has like integration with the Gmail, Slack, Salesforce, Twitter, SQL, SAP, everything you can do without the code. Okay, now we will understand what is the Azure AI services. Okay, so AI services, it was previously called as cognitive services, but now they have renamed it. So this will give you the pre-built AI that you can use in your application with just one API call. So no machine learning knowledge is required for that. Okay. And how many categories we have? So we have the different tech categories here. Like, we have the vision. So suppose if you want to analyze the image or read the text from the photos, detect the faces, you can use the vision. For speech also, like suppose if you want to speech to text or text to speech translation, if you want to do that, you can use the speech. Then for language, like, for sentiment analysis, key phrase extraction, translation, right? During that time, you can use the language. Decision is like for the anomaly detection, content modernization. So during that time, you can use the Azure AI services. So for example, suppose if you are building a food review app, okay? So users write like, the pizza taste was awful, or maybe it's the taste was bad. So what you can do that you can call this sentiment analysis, and it will return the, like, result as negative, right? So in that way you can understand, like, what kind of feedback you are getting. Suppose for the another example, suppose user upload a photo to the menu in the uh, Japanese. So what you will do, like, you can use the vision OCR API, and it will translate to the English. Okay, so no AI training is required. You can just consume their API and you can use that inside your application. Okay, so when to use that? When you need the AI feature, but you do not want to build or train the models by yourself. During that time, you can use the Azure services. Okay, now we will understand, like, what is the Azure Service Bus. So this is our last service. So this is just like, messaging queue. So it helps different part of your application to talk to each other reliably. Okay, so now you will say, like, why not just one services directly? Okay, because it has that suppose if that service is down or slow, your whole application will break. Okay, so with the service bus, what you will do, you will put a message in the queue, and the other service will pick it, okay, when it is ready. So even if your system will be down for the 5 minutes, your the message will wait safely. Okay, so suppose, like, I'll give one e-commerce example. So suppose if you click on the place order, so order placed. Okay, and uh, the place order will be message in the queue. Okay, now what it will do, it will the payment services will pick that from the queue, and it will again the process and confirms that, right? So even though if your payment services is slow, order does not fail, right? The masses just wait in the queue. Users see the processing and get the confirmation when it's done. Okay, so when to use that? So you can use that for the microservices communication, order processing, or any system where service needs to be talked without crashing to the each other. During that time you can use that. Okay, so I hope this video helped that. See you in the next video. Thank you.